When people talk about The Collector, they usually describe it as a psychological thriller or a story about obsession. But I think that reading is only half the picture. Underneath the crime plot, John Fowles is writing about class, about what happens when someone gains money but never gains a sense of belonging. The novel argues that you can buy access to things, but you can't buy entry into a social world. What Clegg calls love is really possession. He wants Miranda the way he wants a butterfly in a case: beautiful, intact, and unable to leave. At a basic plot level, the story is simple. Frederick Clegg is a socially awkward clerk who collects butterflies. After winning a large sum of money, he buys an isolated country house, prepares a cellar, abducts Miranda Gray, an art student he has watched from afar, and keeps her there, convinced that if he provides for her long enough, she'll eventually accept him. The first section is told in Clegg's voice, then the middle of the book switches to Miranda's diary, and the final section returns to Clegg. By the end, Miranda is dead, and Clegg is disturbingly unchanged. The novel's power comes not from the crime, but from its doubleness. Two narrators who speak two social languages. Clegg's voice is one of possession and control. Miranda's is one of conversation, culture, and mutual recognition. That gap is the engine of the book. Clegg's worldview is built around collecting and possession. From the first pages, his butterfly hobby isn't just a character quirk, it's a metaphor. He likes things that can be caught, labeled, and pinned into place. He prefers order, stillness, and control. Butterflies don't argue or reject him. They become objects he can catalog. That mentality quietly becomes the way he understands relationships. Instead of seeing people as independent subjects, he treats them like acquisitions. When he wins the pool, the money feels like a miracle to him. It's the first time he has power, but notice how he uses it. He doesn't travel, try to change himself, or integrate socially. He doesn't learn new cultural codes or attempt to join Miranda's world. Instead, he buys privacy and isolation. He purchases a house in the countryside and modifies the cellar. In other words, he spends the money on infrastructure for control, not on growth. The cash gives him means, but it doesn't change his mindset. His narration reflects this perfectly. His voice is practical and managerial. He describes everything like a project: measurements, supplies, timing, arrangements. Even when he talks about Miranda, he frames her comfort in logistical terms: food, blankets, furniture, as if emotional connection can be engineered through provisioning. It's the language of a caretaker mixed with the logic of an owner. He genuinely believes that if he does everything properly, she'll come around. That belief shows how transactional his understanding of human relationships is. And this is where class comes in. Clegg doesn't want Miranda as a person. He wants what she represents. She belongs to a different cultural world: art school, intellectual conversations, friends who debate ideas, and teachers who mentor her creatively. He watches that world from the outside with a mixture of envy and resentment. He can observe it, but he can't decode it. He doesn't understand the references or the values that hold that world together. This disconnect highlights ongoing social divides, making the novel's critique of class and cultural capital still relevant today. So instead of learning the language, he tries to buy the lifestyle, as if recreating the material conditions will recreate the meaning. He thinks a house, privacy, and money will equal intimacy, but belonging isn't physical. It's social and symbolic. You can't purchase it like furniture. What's especially disturbing is that Clegg never truly develops. Many stories like this give the antagonist a moment of moral awakening. Fowles refuses that. Even after reading Miranda's diary, even after seeing how deeply she suffered, Clegg doesn't become more empathetic. Instead, he rationalizes. By the final section, he's already thinking about the future in the same cold, procedural way. He insists he wouldn't repeat his actions, but his thoughts quietly circle how things might work better next time. The logic of collecting remains. If anything, he becomes more entrenched. The novel ends not with redemption, but with the terrifying suggestion of repetition. He calmly begins watching another girl. He prepares the cellar again, already rationalizing why this time will be different. Miranda, by contrast, feels alive from the moment her diary begins. Where Clegg's narration is flat and technical, Miranda's writing is reflective, emotional, and intellectually curious. She analyzes herself. She critiques society. She writes about art, morality, and freedom. Her voice immediately feels larger because she exists in a network of ideas and relationships. Highlighting her depth should inspire admiration and a sense of loss in the audience. Through her memories, we see her life before captivity, art school, friends, exhibitions, mentors. She talks about painting, literature, and ambition. Those details matter because they show what Clegg can't see. Miranda's identity isn't just personal, it's communal. She belongs to conversations. She belongs to a culture. Her life is built out of exchange, ideas moving between people. That's precisely what makes her confinement so devastating. It's not only physical imprisonment, it's social erasure cut off from her art community, friends, mentors, and the cultural exchanges that define her identity. She's isolated from the systems that gave her life meaning, emphasizing how social and cultural belonging are vital to personal identity. Throughout her diary, Miranda tries different strategies to survive. She reasons with him. She attempts sympathy. She tries to educate him to make him see her as a person. She experiments with politeness and resistance. But what's consistent is that she never truly accepts his terms. Her refusal to internalize the emotional toll of her captivity reveals her resilience and highlights the psychological impact of social and physical control, reinforcing the novel's critique of power dynamics. Even when he insists he's being respectful, there's a constant undercurrent of entitlement to Miranda's body, as if access to her is something he has earned. He kidnaps her specifically because he's attracted to her. He watches her for months beforehand. He fantasizes about a future where she eventually comes round and loves him back. And throughout the book, there are moments when his restraint isn't moral, it's strategic. He frames himself as decent because he doesn't assault her outright, but that framing is revealing. He treats not violating her as evidence that he's kind. The bar is on the floor. His version of goodness is simply not committing the worst possible act, but that still places her body inside his control. He dictates when she eats, sleeps, bathes, and goes outside. He watches her. He comments on her clothes. He manages her like property. Even when he gives her privacy, it's privacy he has granted, which means it can be taken away. The power imbalance is absolute, so the threat of sexual violence is always there, even when it isn't explicit. And that's what makes it disturbing. Miranda isn't just trapped. She's trapped with a man who believes he deserves her eventually. That mindset mirrors the butterfly metaphor again. He doesn't want to hurt the butterfly. He wants it intact, but it's still pinned down and still owned, still unable to leave. Care without consent is just control. And what makes this even more effective is that Fowles doesn't turn Miranda into a perfect victim to make the point. She isn't angelic, endlessly patient, or morally pure. She's flawed, she's judgmental, she can be snobbish. She looks down on Clegg intellectually and socially. In her diary, she sometimes sounds sharp or cruel about him. She calls him dull, small-minded, ordinary. She categorizes him. At times, she's dismissive or classist in her thoughts, and that's precisely why she feels real. If Miranda were saintly, the story would feel symbolic and tidy. Good person versus evil monster. Instead, she feels recognizably human. She gets frustrated, she gets petty, she gets angry, she loses hope. Sometimes she manipulates him to survive. Sometimes she thinks unkind things. And honestly, of course she does. She's a terrified young woman being held captive. Expecting her to be morally perfect would be absurd. Her flaws don't weaken the story. They strengthen it because they prove the novel isn't asking us to sympathize with a perfect victim. It's asking us to recognize an ordinary person who still deserves freedom. Because they show that you don't have to be pure or likable to deserve freedom. You don't have to be nice to your captor to justify not being imprisoned. Fowles is careful about that. Miranda's personality doesn't matter. Her class background doesn't matter. Her occasional arrogance doesn't matter. Nothing about her character could ever justify what happens to her. And that's the point. Clegg, however, constantly searches for reasons why it's her fault. He interprets her resistance as ingratitude. He treats her anger as unfairness. He frames himself as the reasonable one and her as difficult. It's classic entitlement logic. If she would just behave correctly, everything would be fine. Which completely ignores the fact that the only correct behavior he'll accept is submission. So their flaws contrast interestingly. Miranda's flaws are human: impatience, judgment, and ego. Clegg's flaw is structural. He doesn't see other people as fully autonomous at all. She might be unkind sometimes. He removes her freedom. Those aren't morally comparable things. And that imbalance is what makes the book so bleak. Because in the end, the imperfect, complicated, very human person dies, and the man who treats people like specimens simply carries on. This is where the class difference becomes unavoidable. Miranda doesn't accept him. She refuses to be bought. Her refusal is not snobbery. It's an insistence on autonomy because she recognizes there is no shared social foundation to their relationship. He wants obedience and appreciation. She wants mutual recognition and freedom. Those values can't be reconciled. He thinks love can grow out of possession. She knows love requires choice. No amount of money can bridge that philosophical gap. The novel's structure reinforces this divide. By placing Miranda's diary after Clegg's section, Fowles forces us to reinterpret everything we just read. Events that seemed calm or reasonable through Clegg's clinical narration suddenly feel horrifying and claustrophobic through Miranda's eyes. It's the same situation but told in two completely different social languages. One of ownership, one of subjectivity. That contrast makes it clear that class isn't just wealth. It's a way of understanding reality. Even the side characters help define this boundary. Miranda's artistic mentors and friends represent a world of critique, creativity, and shared culture. Clegg's life, by comparison, is narrow and isolated. His relationships are shallow and routine. The contrast isn't there to mock him, but to show how little access he has to the kinds of communities that teach emotional literacy. Without those tools, he substitutes control. By the end, the novel feels less like a thriller and more like a warning. Clegg believes money solves everything. He treats wealth as a shortcut to intimacy, but all it really does is give him the power to enforce his loneliness. Instead of bridging the gap between himself and others, he fortifies it. So, the tragedy of The Collector isn't just that Miranda dies. It's that nothing changes. The system that created someone like Clegg, socially alienated, emotionally stunted, convinced that ownership equals love, keeps going. The final pages suggest that the cycle could simply repeat. And that's why the book still feels so uncomfortable. It suggests that class isn't just about who has money. It's about who understands the unwritten rules of belonging. You can climb economically without ever arriving socially. And if you mistake possession for connection, you don't get romance, you get control. In the end, Clegg can buy a house. He can purchase privacy. He can buy security. But he can't buy the one thing he actually wants, to be chosen. And that's what makes the story so bleak. And so hard to forget. And what's striking is that the plot itself is almost straightforward. On paper, it's just a kidnapping story. That could be the premise of any crime thriller. But Fowles isn't interested in suspense or twists. The horror comes from how ordinary everything feels. How a dull, methodical man can commit something monstrous while still thinking of himself as reasonable. The book isn't powered by action. It's powered by perspective. The real tension isn't, will she escape? But, how can two people understand the world so differently? That psychological and social gap is what makes the novel unsettling, long after the actual events are over. Thanks for watching till the end. If you'd like more analysis videos like this, consider subscribing and feel free to suggest topics in the comments.